Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Asia Society Policy Institute's webinar, where we're going to be discussing Asian equities in the USMCA review, which is scheduled to take place in July of next year. I'm Wendy Cutler. I'm Senior Vice President at ASPE, and I'll be moderating the discussion today with an incredible panel of from folks all over the world. As you can see, my voice is a little, let's just say a little weak today, so please bear with me. The first official review of the USMCA is 5 months away. While it's technically called a review, I think everyone is expecting a renegotiation, and internal preparations are underway, not only in Washington, but in Ottawa and Mexico City as well. And while the USMCA has been instrumental in integrating the three economies in North America, Asia also has important equities in this negotiation, given their extensive trade and investment ties with the region. As a result, the USMCA review will have discernible impacts on our Asian trading partners, and that's what we're going to look at today. Some of the issues we'll be discussing include exploring the potential commercial impacts of an updated USMCA for Asia, discussion of how rising economic security concerns may be addressed, including restraints on Chinese investment in Chinese content, examining how strengthened rules of origin could impact Asian imports, and discussing prospects of an updated USMCA serving as a template for future trade negotiations with the United States and others. To discuss these and other related topics, allow me to quickly introduce our four incredible panelists. First, Joshua Meltzer is a senior fellow in the Global Economy and Development Program here in Washington at the Brookings Institute, where he directs the USMCA initiative on North American cooperation. Meredith Lilly is a professor at Carleton University's Norman Patterson School of International Affairs and is a former Foreign Affairs and Trade Advisor to Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper. César Remis is the Managing Director at Trade Envoy, a consulting group, and importantly, he was the former head of Mexico's USMCA's implementation office. And Takemasa Sekine is a professor at the Yokohama National University Graduate School of International Social Sciences, where he focuses on trade, economic security, dispute settlement, and labor issues. So with that, let's get started. And for our audience, thank you for joining us. And if you would like to ask questions to the panelists, please use the Q&A function down in the Zoom box. So with that, let me start off with a question for each panelist. And that is, from your vantage point, why should Asian countries pay attention to the USMCA review? What are their equities? Are they just commercial? Are there template concerns? But are there also specific areas that may be negotiated that are likely to have an impact on our Asian trading partners? So Josh, maybe I can start with you there. If you can kind of give us an overview of your views on why Asia should pay attention and input into this negotiating process. Over to you, Josh.
Thanks, Wendy, and thank you for the invitation to be here. It's great to be on this panel with so many great panelists as well, so I really look forward to the conversation. So I think we can break this down. I think you actually kind of outlined probably some of the key ways of thinking about this from a commercial and a template perspective. I think commercially, it's probably well understood that North America, while a integrated region, is also integrated in various ways into supply chains that bring in a lot of North Asia and Southeast Asia. So, whether we're thinking about batteries, autos, EVs, computer and other goods, medical products, there's a lot of input and products that come from, China, but also from Japan and Korea and Vietnam and Thailand and so forth. So there's a significant amount of intermediate trading goods that happens as a result of North America, because what we've seen is that a lot of firms in Asia use North America as a basis for manufacturing and often for exporting and integrating and accessing the US market in particular. So Mexico is a key manufacturing hub for a lot of Asian parts suppliers, for instance, that then, produce products which then get exported into the US. And this is increasingly been the case as you've had two kind of trends here. One is that the US has emphasised, certainly under the Biden administration, friendshoring or reshoring. So this has been an opportunity to bring, sort of China-orientated supply chains back to North America. And so a lot of the Asian manufacturers have participated in that process. But the other side of the coin, which doesn't get mentioned enough, which is that a lot of Asia companies want to also diversify away from China and see the North American platform and the treaty that underpins it, the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement, as kind of the way of doing that. So it's very important commercially. I'd say just quickly on the template front, this will be really the first time that, assuming this is a renegotiation, assuming we get to an outcome here, that we're going to get a much clearer, I think, articulation of what the Trump administration is thinking of in terms of a lot of the new issues that are coming up in these deals that we're seeing negotiated in Asia, economic security, digital, and so forth, but we're going to see it articulated in a more, I think, fulsome way. So we're going to get a lot more clarity around what these type of rules mean. And then I think finally, the thing that is going to be, I think, critical for Asia is rules of origin, right? Because this is ultimately going to determine how much non-North American content can enter the North American market. And this will then kind of have a big impact on the extent that this will be traded or require further investment and kind of reshoring back into North America to take advantage of the agreement. So I'll stop there.
That's great. César, maybe I can turn to you because Josh did underscore the growing presence of Asian companies in North America. And we've really seen an explosion of Asian investment in Mexico in particular, in recent years since the USMCA in particular was concluded. So how's Mexico looking at this? Because clearly your economy is benefiting from a lot of Asian investment. What are you looking at in the review in terms of your relations with our Asian trading partners?
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure for to thank you for the invitation, Wendy, and a pleasure to be with this great panel. Well, as you were saying, there's a lot of investment in the three countries. I think it's much of the attention is being put on Mexico, but the reality is, first of all, the investment is not that big as one would think in Mexico from Asia, but it is significant, and it has increased recently, as you were pointing out. So, but it's even much larger in the US or Canada, no? But still, I think this has a lot of implications. For example, and this is because the USMCA review or the USMCA is more than just a North American free trade agreement. It will impact, the supply chains globally, global supply chains. It will impact digital framework. It will impact investment decisions. Yeah? And Asian companies established in Mexico or from abroad should pay attention to that because they really have a stake on trade continuity, as Joshua was mentioning. There's a lot of they are part of the supply chains in North America. In key sectors such as electronics or automotive. It will affect investment certainty through rules of origin and regional content requirement that will affect companies established in Canada and Mexico, and also it will have the template implication that were mentioned, and you mentioned at the beginning, Wendy and Joshua as well. That this new provision will, coming out from the revision, could impact future FTAs in Asia. And I'm telling you this, because the other way around too. What we saw that the U.S. Negotiated recently in Asia, it shows, some of the attention that it will put on the revisions. Like, for example, export control, more investment screening. Who is investing in Mexico? I mean, I think that there will be more scrutiny on who is investing in Mexico, how they are profiting, and how they are sourcing. There will be, third country content restrictions, and they may, even require, that as they did with Malaysia or Cambodia, that before entering a digital trade agreement, they consult with the U.S. And in the case of Mexico, all the non-trade barriers will be a focus and also, the compliance with the agreement. But for Mexico, the priority will be, to preserve free trade. I don't know if that's going to be possible at this point, but the reality is that they should aim also, I mean, Mexico should aim to also to maintain as much flexibility in rules of origin and other restrictions, to attract foreign investment. But the reality is Mexico will try to accommodate U.S. concerns, because at the end, let's not forget that the U.S. is Mexico's first trading partner. 80% of our export goes to the U.S. And we are also U.S. first trading partner. So there's interest, and there are areas in common, where interests aligned, like in digital trade. So I think that there are many opportunities. I think investment will be under a lot of scrutiny, but we can discuss this later.
Great. Meredith, maybe I can turn it to you for a Canadian perspective on the upcoming review and how it may impact our Asian trading partners. Over to you.
Sure. So, and thanks for the invitation to be here. So, just building on what Josh and César have already said, I think there's two key things when it comes to Canada. So, one thing that Asian countries are going to want to watch is the intersection between CPTPP and the USMCA, because Mexico and Canada are members of both trade agreements. And in the CPTPP, Canada and Mexico are outliers in that 75% of our exports go to the United States, whereas every other Asian economy in the TPP, as you would know very well, Wendy, are much less reliant on trade with the United States. And so what that means for Canada, and I won't speak for Mexico, but it is a similar thing, is that Canada is always looking at its trade with other countries through the American lens. So we're thinking about how do we balance what we want in Asia with what we're trying to do with the United States. And so Asian countries are going to want to watch how this all unfolds, because I do think there will be impacts on CPTPP, on market access in certain sensitive sectors for TPP partners. And so, what do those Asian countries, where are their interests intersecting with Canada and Mexico? And then I think the other big piece that Asian countries will be interested in is the United States going to pursue the so-called Fortress North America approach to the USMCA negotiations, where it seeks to work with Canada and Mexico to build a stronger, more integrated region, to do things like impose an external tariff on certain strategic goods, that kind of thing, which will have really profound impacts on Mexico and Canada? Or will the United States seek a much more unilateral approach, as it has been doing somewhat for the last year, the administration, because that will also impact the way that Canada both responds to the United States, but also are we going to be seeking to really double down on our efforts to diversify trade if the United States isn't going to be a reliable partner for us? So from my perspective, when it comes to Canada, the United States, and Asia, those are the big things to watch.
Maybe I can follow up with you, Meredith, because I'm going to be a diplomat here and just say U.S.-Canadian trade relations are a bit rocky right now. And Canada's been making efforts to diversify, particularly with Asian trading partners. And we have seen in recent U.S. trade agreements with other partners increased scrutiny of new trade agreements kind of baked into the U.S. agreements. Is this going to be an important issue for Canada?
I think it is. I think it is and it isn't. So one of the things that happened in the USMCA negotiations was the insertion of the NME clause, the non-market economy clause, which is the so-called China clause, which requires Mexico and Canada to inform the United States if we intend to pursue trade negotiations with a non-market economy. In many ways, Canada saw that initial text as a little bit redundant to the withdrawal text that already exists in USMCA, and so it wasn't nearly as big of an issue at that time. But at this point, we've now got the Malaysia-Cambodia deals where there's new language, which is much more sweeping, this idea around U.S. national interest, whatever that is. I don't anticipate that Canada would, and it's been suggested that this Malaysia-Cambodia text, some of this will become template text, which has already been mentioned. And so if it does become template text for USMCA negotiations, I don't actually see Canada signing on to something that says, we're going to defer to U.S. national interest. That's extremely broad and doesn't provide the stability and certainty that we need in order to engage productively in other parts of the trade negotiation. So I think we have to see where it goes. Trade diversification is important for Canada, but and it is, an evergreen project for us, or at least it should be. But I think that at the same time, we very much are aware of where our bread is buttered. And so we'll continue to make strong efforts to work with the US. But I think we have to see what some of this template text actually looks like in the end.
So Takemasa-san, first of all, thank you very much, because I know it's so late in Tokyo. So before we go to sleep, with just a few questions, is Tokyo even paying attention to the USMCA review? And from Japan's perspective, what are the key issues that Tokyo will or should be watching?
Thank you very much, Wendy. And I should say good afternoon to everyone. And I'm very happy to join this wonderful webinar. And to answer your question from the perspective of Tokyo or Japan, well, actually, it's very important. USMCA is always very important. And I think there's a direct effect and the indirect effect. And because I'm law professor, so I'm more interested in the rulemaking. And what I'm thinking is that after the revised UMCA, probably we have to prepare to negotiate again with the United States, because we can easily expect that after USMCA, we might have a chance to make an agreement with the United States. But at that time, we have to think to what extent we are going to incorporate the rules that was made under the USMCA. And also, I think we need to think about indirect effect, which means that to what extent we can incorporate new rules in the TPP. Well, actually, I think I'm not sure to what extent Japanese government are interested in still trying to persuade United States to come back to the TPP. But still, if we have to think about updating the TPP, at that time, always USMCA would be a kind of indicator to decide whether we should follow the new rules in the USMCA or not. So that's very important thing. And also, as Meredith and other speakers has already mentioned, that Malaysia and Cambodia had made a very important deal between those countries and the United States. And if I look at that agreement, probably there are two important things. One is that we have to look at the economic security issues. And that seems to be not a significant issue for Japan, because basically Japanese economic security policies are basically similar to the US. So maybe we can corroborate, we can harmonize it. But the more bigger issue is as Meredith mentioned, that it's a poison pill provision. That is, maybe we can say that's a no market economy clauses, but that's a very important issue, and that makes very difficult for Japan to negotiate if that is included in the USMCA, because that makes very difficult to negotiate with Canada or Mexico for the new trade deals. So I should stop here. That's the question. Answer so far. Yes.
Okay. Josh, maybe over to you then, because the economic security component, I think, of in this renegotiation is going to be important. And, you know, this could include everything from trying to align the three countries' regimes closer on export controls, on investment screening, on supply chain resiliency. Do you think that the U.S. negotiating stance is going to mainly focus on economic security? And how do you see these issues playing out, particularly with Mexico and Canada, that while they have their own regimes, may not be as developed as the U.S. regime?
Yeah, look, great question. And so I do think that, you know, it will be in the negotiation. It's not in the text of the USMCA to date. It kind of really reflects how things have changed in these sort of few short years since the agreement was finalized in 2019. 2020. And if you look at, I think it's an interesting starting point. If you look at these sort of trade deals, sorry for the air quotes, but I think you get it, that the US has done with Cambodia, with Malaysia in particular, which is more in agreement with the others, kind of framework agreements. You do see quite a bit of there on the economic security part. So I feel my sense is like this is where we can start to begin to get a sense of how the US or this administration is thinking about economic security in the context of these deals. And you do get this range of issues that you're kind of outlining there, both on the export control side, which is kind of, I think, very predictable. It's something that the Biden administration was obviously working closely with allies on and is clearly necessary in order to make sure that kind of any export control regime doesn't have too much leakage and harms US firms in the process. But I think, you know, interestingly, you've got a lot more in there on these issues of third countries investing in Malaysia and then exporting to the US, and all these various impacts that may or may not have on trade with the US and US trade with third parties. If you look at the language closely, it's a little sort of, excuse my French, loosey-goosey, but in the sense that there's a lot of things that would need to be pinned down, I think, to really understand how this would work. But the fact that it's in there, I think, is kind of an interesting data point on how the administration is thinking about sort of issues around transshipment. I think in particular, and it's not kind of mentioned, it's not entirely about transshipment, but really thinking about how third countries are using these trade agreements to essentially impact then access to the US market, also US exports into third markets. So I think this will be part of the USMCA discussions, right? Because there's a big issue around China transshipment, particularly, and sort of avoiding US tariffs and other investment restrictions by investing into Mexico. And that really brings in, though, like a lot of Southeast Asian countries that are part of Chinese supply chains, where we see in the data, for instance, like exports of particular products from Vietnam going up as those exports from China go down, and you see some clear kind of diversion through supply chains into Mexico often and then into the United States. So this is not going to be a sort of a China plus issue as well. But I think, you know, the big picture on the economic security piece, I think then for Canada and Mexico, is going to be this sort of push under the guise of economic security for a lot more closer alignment and integration with US policy. So you've got this tension there where Canada's looking to diversify and create space and more interdependence and so forth, yet the dynamics under the rubric of economic security are going to be pushing very much in the opposite direction.
César, maybe we can pick up on that, because Josh did mention that there will probably be strong efforts by the United States to limit Chinese participation in the North American supply chain. And traditionally, that is, you know, when people try, and when they think about that, you think about the origin of the product, the content of the product, and limiting Chinese content. But now we're also hearing maybe limiting content from Chinese firms invested in third countries like Mexico or Canada, regardless of whether that content is produced in Mexico or in Canada. Is this something that Mexico would consider going forward? And, I note that you were, in charge of Mexican implementation of the initial USMCA at one point. Is this something that in reality could be even implemented?
Yes, yes, Wendy. Well, yes, I mean, it is, as Joshua was mentioning, it was mentioned here. I mean, the U.S. is not only likely to propose a stricter rule, but they are proposing stricter rules. I think this conversation is already taking place. I mean, with tariff that they have been discussed, for the past month, I think they are already discussing about, stricter rules of origin. And I think from what we saw again from Malaysia and Cambodia and the other, agreement with Asian countries, the U.S. will seek to monitor much closely, the function of the agreement, whatever that result, so that they can, make sure that the rules of origin do not benefit other countries. And I'm going to the investment because Mexico recently was encouraged, to encourage to
A lot of
to
quotes
raise,
going on in this webinar.
yes, to raise tariffs, to a broad set of input, from countries where we do not have FTA. So I think yes, we can expect. I mean, even because I mean the problem, or one of the problems that Joshua was saying, I mean, is the concern about the transshipment. Yes, because companies established already in Mexico, I mean, as long as they comply with the rule of origin, there shouldn't be a problem. They will make it, more strict, and they will be under more scrutiny. They will look closely. They can expect, more verification of origin, more compliance requirement. And companies will need, I think it will be forced, to reevaluate supply chains, to maintain the USMCA treatment. And there are some opportunities, I mean, and challenges, how to source locally or regionally. I mean, it's going to be perhaps a challenge for some input, for some sector. But I think there's also an opportunity, and you were saying, I mean, is that possible? I think it's a good moment, the review, to also take a look at, how can we cooperate more? I mean, among the three countries, in customs, customs cooperation would be key. If you are concerned about, transshipment or whatever, how can we conduct perhaps, regional investigation, that together we can, make investigations on unfair practices or more real cooperation to exchange more information and being able to tackle, or I mean, to detect first and tackle some of these, concerns. No, so I think it is possible. It is, something that we should, or I think it's convenient to discuss these days. No?
So to follow up, you did mention that Mexico has put forward a proposal to raise tariffs on certain products with respect to its non-FTA partners. My understanding is that included a 40% tariff on electric vehicles. But now China's come in and kind of, let's just say, complained and maybe has issued some vague threats. And it seems that maybe Mexico is reconsidering, or at least not moving forward with this, with this proposed regulation as quickly as it initially planned to. Where does that issue stand now? Is this on hold, or do you think these tariff increases will be going forward?
I mean, I think Mexico, the government of Mexico did right on, because, I mean, they raised tariffs, sorry, on many products, including, you were saying electric vehicles, and they raised tariff for input as well. But the government did very well, on only raising to the WTO, consolidated tariff, which is, a good way, just not to, because Mexico is not targeting a country. In that sense, they are explaining, and I think even if China or other countries are not, happy, the reality is that this aims to countries that Mexico has no FTA with, no? So it's not targeting a country in specific. It is only, applies for all non-FTA partners, of Mexico. So in that sense, it is a good treatment, or at least, there's equality, on that, and it is within the limit that the international trade rules allows. No?
Meredith, maybe I can continue this conversation, because Canada, a year or 2 years ago, followed the United States and implemented 100% tariff on imports of Chinese electric vehicles. It seems like in recent weeks, maybe months, that there is, as part of its diversification effort, Ottawa is looking to maybe gradually improve its relations with China and maybe reconsidering this tariff. Obviously, China does not like this tariff and would put pressure on Canada, and I'm sure is already putting pressure on Canada to lower this tariff. How do you see, again, for Ottawa entering into this USMCA negotiation, how is it going to juggle pressures from China if indeed, it wants to improve relations with Beijing and yet respond to U.S. request maybe to have a unified tariff with respect to certain products on Chinese imports?
Yeah, the tricky question. So, on the tariff itself, Beijing does not like the tariff, would like it to be eliminated. There's been lots of talk in our media that Canada might be considering rescinding it, but I actually don't think that it is. Realistically, I think there are specific stakeholder groups that would very much like to see it gone, but Canada is very aware that to remove that tariff today, right now, would not be a great move as we prepare for the USMCA negotiations. And something that I've said many times in the past is that China claims that its retaliation against Canada in the areas of agricultural products is linked to this tariff. But if it weren't that, China would find another reason to weaponize and tariff Canada in those other ways. And so we have to be very careful not to allow a narrative that's coming out of Beijing to influence our domestic politics and regional divisions on these issues. So that piece aside, what does this mean for USMCA? Yes, Canada is seeking to thaw relations somewhat with Beijing. We have had exactly one meeting now between our Prime Minister and Chinese leadership in 7 years, and that happened a week ago or so. But that's actually the same number of meetings that the United States has had with China. And so the idea that we are warming more than the United States is, I think we do have to call that one out a little bit and call it for what it is, because there is a narrative suggesting that we should be seeking to improve relations with China. And I think we have to look at reality and the facts around that. Now, if USMCA negotiations seek to discipline Canada and Mexico around Chinese investment and that kind of thing, I think there actually is some potential for the three countries to work together around this issue. But what I would say is that whatever applies to Canada and Mexico must also apply to the United States. And at the moment, we're seeing fairly mixed signals with respect to where the White House wants to go with China itself. So if the United States wants to limit Chinese investments in manufacturing in Canada or Mexico, it also has to be prepared to absorb that same rule for itself. And there's times that we really do wonder what the current White House's goals are in that respect. So I think we're a little bit at a pivot moment, and a lot of it does hinge on where the United States seeks to go. But I guess the final thing I would say is that Canada, it has not served Canada well to insert itself in or to find itself pushed into the conflict between the United States and China. And so I do think you will start to see in the coming months more of decisions by Canada to allow the United States and China to work out their own foreign policy and trade interests. And Canada will do the same, but directly with China.
Josh, do you think there are strong prospects, at least with respect to certain products, of having a unified North American tariff, against certain countries, or maybe just against an external third country tariff applying to all countries?
Yeah, so this is, I think, probably the trajectory where there are sector or product specific common tariffs, and that apply, and then I think the key question is, who do they apply to? Are kind of the easiest approach is everyone, but that's not necessarily the goal. But in order not to apply to everyone, like if there's a subset of countries that the US, North America don't want in supply chains, then you have to find ways to have arrangements with everyone else to make sure that they're not points of transshipment into North America. But I think if you look at, for instance, autos, the auto sector writ large, it's clearly a priority for the Trump administration as a domestic issue, and it's obviously very important for Canada and Mexico as well. So I think that's one sector where you imagine that happening. But I think if you look across at some of the Section 232 sectoral tariffs, I think that gives some sense of the administration's sort of priorities. I know they're, even under the nomenclature of national security, it's obviously economic security. It's a mix of sort of domestic goals and the type of manufacturing I think that the administration wants to see more of, certainly in the United States, but I think it's to be negotiated how that works across North America. So if you look at semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, for instance, steel and aluminum as well, potentially I think critical minerals as well, you can sort of see tariffs as important part of the toolkit where you do get a common North American tariff there.
Takemasa-san, how would Japan view kind of North American unified tariffs against third countries on certain products, number one? And number two, we've had a lot of discussion of the automotive sector, and I think we all agree that's going to be like a key sector of interest in the renegotiation. What is Tokyo most concerned about with respect to where the USMCA could go with respect to more restraints on automotive investment or trade?
Okay, thank you very much for the two questions. So I would like to try to answer one by one. With regard to the unified tariff against Asian countries, of course, it's a big issue for Asian countries that they have to dramatically change the strategy to sell the products in the United States. So it would be a very big issue. But actually, in that case, I'm not sure whether the relationship between the preferential tariff under the TPP and those unified tariffs, so it becomes more complicated, and I am not sure whether we can clarify those various tariffs. But actually, if North American countries has introduced a unified tariff, then it's going to be a huge impact for Asian countries. And in that case, we need to think about the balance of Chinese market and the US market, because I think there should be some kind of tipping point. The US market is pretty important for Asian countries, of course, including Japan, but it becomes quite difficult to export, or it becomes inconvenient to export to the United States. Maybe same with Canada and Mexico, that we have to diversify and try to seize a different markets. So in that case, we have to rethink about the strategy on that. And the second question is automobile. Again, it's a very critical industry for Japan. And I think we already discussed about, some investment, direct investment in the United States might be affected by the USMCA. And I am not sure, to what extent Japanese products, automobiles, the supply chain includes Chinese products. But if Chinese product becomes critical, then even directly investing the US market becomes very problematic. And again, it makes very difficult for Japanese companies to invest or have a trade with US market. And then we probably within Japan, we have to discuss about skipping US market. It's not a easy way to do that, but probably people will start to think about whether we should make a free trade area without the United States. So I'm not sure which one will be the tipping point, but the USMCA's new outcome would have a very strong impact on that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe now we can turn to maybe some potential areas of cooperation where the USMCA could be a useful template and maybe even bring in on certain issues, align with other Asian partners like Japan as well. And there, kind of the digital provisions come to mind. And, AI wasn't around when, the USMCA was initially negotiated. Do you see AI cooperation or updating the digital provisions being an area of cooperation in the renegotiation? Meredith, maybe I can start with you.
Sure. It'll be short, though. Yes, is the answer. I think, yes, USMCA was, it really doesn't have the robust kind of chapter that we'd be looking at. So broader governance provisions, broader governance positions in the area of digital AI. One challenge we will have, though, is, we fully expect, like all aspects of the agreement, the United States to, seek to advance its own view of how those provisions should look. We do maintain trade agreements with other countries. We have an agreement with Europe. Europe has a very different view of digital governance than the United States. And so trying to balance, these different worlds and the way that they see digital governance evolving will be a bit of a challenge. But absolutely, I think it is an area that we should be looking at.
Josh, you've written a lot on this area in particular. Be interested in your views. Is this an area in terms of cooperation or, concern? Would this area fall more in the cooperation bucket than area of concern? Because I think Meredith did raise, an interesting point that particularly Mexico and Canada do have agreements with other countries that have different views on what a digital regime should look like.
Yeah, it's one area where, again, things are probably going to be more complicated than they should be, in that we've obviously got a robust digital trade chapter in the USMCA already, but arguably it certainly could be updated to take into account in AI and other technologies that are coming onto the market. But, one of the issues so you've got the US administration at the moment that's developing an export sort of stack promotion plan. There's clearly an ambition to essentially, export the entire US technology stack. And sort of there's clear language that they want other countries to sort of use this. And then that becomes the basis for a global set of international standards. And it's really couched as well as choosing between the US AI stack or the China technology is sort of an option that the US is not going to tolerate. And I think that, what is going to be challenging, I think, for Canada, certainly, and we've seen this to some extent in some of the AI policy and thinking that's going on in Canada, is, what increasing dependence on US technology is going to mean for Canada, right? So whether it's cloud computing, hyperscaling, the AI, the technology, the models, and so forth, and what's the role for Canada in this sort of notion of the US AI stack. So I think while there are areas where I think Canada would certainly be aligned with the US, and I think Mexico as well, in terms of maximizing the opportunities from AI, talent, mobility, cybersecurity, cooperating on regulation. I think underlying this is going to be one of the challenges of is if this is going to mean growing dependence on the US, and that becomes then in the future another point of US leverage over Canada, what does that mean for Canada? And so you have this notion in Canada, but also in a lot of other countries around the world of AI sovereignty, and it's got different meanings in different parts of the world, but it really captures this idea that governments increasingly are concerned about having no sort of government control over some of this technology as it becomes increasingly, I think, important and central to their economies. I think it's interesting if you look again at the deal that the US recently struck with Malaysia, for instance, you can sort of see again in there some of the way that the administration is thinking about technology. So there's a lot of emphasis in there on the issues that the Trump administration, for instance, has had with Canada around no digital services taxes, commitments on, not putting customs duties on electronic commerce, which has sort of been an issue that comes up in trade agreements. But also you see in there, for instance, a commitment that Malaysia will, I'm just going to look at the language here, will consult with the US before entering into a digital trade agreement with another country that jeopardizes essential US interests. So you see here specifically in the digital space sort of a US veto in a sense over whether Malaysia enters into digital cooperation with other countries. So how this plays out in the USMCA context still to be seen, but I think there's sort of a space for cooperation and opportunity, but I can see this being challenging for all these other reasons as well.
Okay, so not pure cooperation. Complicated. César, maybe we can talk briefly about the rapid response mechanism, kind of the expedited labor dispute settlement provision of the original USMCA. During those negotiations of the original agreement, this was a very controversial and kind of innovative addition to the agreement. And I suspect, based on some comments that have already been submitted to Washington as part of the USMCA stakeholder outreach, a number of entities in the United States are already asking for improvements to the RRM, including maybe expanding the scope of which of sectors and products that could fall under this mechanism, expediting the timeframes, increasing the penalties. How concerned is Mexico about strengthening this provision? I mean, it seems to have largely worked from the U.S. perspective, but again, I think improvements will be proposed.
Yes, thank you, Wendy. Well, yes, I mean, as you were saying, this is a very innovative provision. This is it was an addition, an upgrade from the NAFTA to the USMCA, the labor provision inside the agreement, and of course, this mechanism that even provide for penalties and many things. The rapid response mechanism is, has been, let's say, effective. Effective because it has solved around 75% of the cases that have been presented. But whether this has been a success, as you were pointing out, Wendy, it depends on the perspective from which you are looking at it. The reality is that, for example, unions in Canada and the US are probably happy, very happy with the functioning of the agreement. Some companies perhaps, but the reality, I mean, is that this mechanism alone will not increase salaries or protect rights across the board in Mexico. And I would say Mexico is satisfied with the current operation of the mechanism. However, the mechanism could be, and it has been, abuse. And you know that it only applies to Mexico. I mean, it's directed to Mexico. So I believe Mexico will be very cautious on expanding it further. I think it's, I mean, it could be, again, it has been abused a little bit, and this is not necessarily positive to expand it. And of course, it will, also, I think in the case of Asian companies, it would mean a lot, they will be under even more oversight, operational oversight. I mean, Asian-owned companies manufacturing in Mexico will be under more scrutiny, for labor compliance. So I think it's tricky, but short answer is I think Mexico would be very cautious. I know there are some people who are cheering for that, but I don't believe it's necessarily the best thing.
Takemasa-san, maybe I could ask you about Japanese investment in the North American region, because right now, based on this $550 billion investment fund with the United States, Japanese companies are, let's just say we're working with Japan to really accelerate Japanese investments in the United States. If the North American rules of origin, let's say on autos, are strengthened further, I think already they're at 75% North American content. Let's just say that number went up more. I mean, do Japanese automotive companies even have the wherewithal to invest more in North America than they're already committed to at the current moment?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Of course, Japanese investors doesn't want to increase the number of, the rural region. That is very obvious. And it's an investment decision is very difficult because once you made a decision to invest to other countries, you cannot reverse it. So it's gonna be a very important decision for many Japanese companies, and I assume that kind of strict rural origin would be a kind of deterrent for the Japanese companies to invest in U.S. markets. So I really hope Canada and Mexico to try to negotiate with the United States to try to reduce or maintain the level of rural origin, or otherwise it will hit Japanese companies, and we cannot guarantee that we can achieve that amount of investment to the United States. That's a brief comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Meredith, how about critical minerals? Do you see this as an area of cooperation that can be folded into the North America, into the USMCA? It seems, based on the recent G7 deliberations by the energy ministers, there is already cooperation between the U.S. and Canada. The U.S. in the past few months has concluded a number of critical minerals agreements on a bilateral basis, including with Japan. And this is a real strength that Canada brings to the negotiating table. So is this going to be leverage for Ottawa in the USMCA talks?
Yeah, and we should use it as leverage. We should find ways to ensure that we are able to negotiate critical mineral agreements in a way that not just provides, potentially certainty to other countries, and that would be leverage on its own. But I think it's actually important for Canada to find ways to piggyback and to add higher value components related to critical minerals as part of its leverage. So what I mean is, instead of just exporting raw commodities to the US or other partners, I think Canada needs to start building in the higher value jobs that go with those. I have heard from the current US administration and the most immediate past US administration this sentiment that Canada will just be a source of raw natural resources, and then the higher value, better advanced manufacturing jobs or AI jobs or whatever it is that go along with those will be jobs for the United States. And I think that we actually have to use our comparative advantage in critical minerals to ensure that we also tie these other pieces so that we can actually maximize the leverage that we can get from it, because we have what the world needs, and we should find ways to ensure that everyone can gain, but that Canada gains as well.
So we have about 5 more minutes, and I just want to do a quick round robin with everyone and ask which issues are also on your radar screen with respect to the impact on Asian interest under the USMCA review that we haven't discussed today. Like we've talked about rules of origin, we've talked about economic security, critical minerals, digital, labor, but are there other areas that either your governments or folks in your country are paying attention to and are developing positions either on a defensive basis or an offensive basis as well? Because this is a real opportunity to kind of, think of new innovative ways to deal with a lot of the challenges that the international trading community is facing. I don't know who wants to go first, but if someone doesn't volunteer, I'll point to you. Any volunteers?
Maybe I'll just note that I think on a defensive basis, I think Canadian energy, I think I would be surprised if our government was not developing positions in this area. We have recently signed new, or not signed, we brought online new pipelines that allow us now to export oil not to the United States. That has actually increased the price that Canada is able to get for Canadian oil. And part of that is because we're dramatically increasing our exports to Asia now. So ensuring that Canada can continue to have independence in this area and that it's not something that gets tied back into USMCA, I think would be important for us.
César? Any thoughts?
Yes, I'm sorry. Well, I think I will go back to the opportunity, to the opportunity in the sense that, and I mean, we already touched upon this issue, but I do believe that in the race, in the technological race, especially between the US and China, I think it's a great opportunity, because to increase cooperation in this area. I mean, cybersecurity is not let's say, something is key for almost everything, and especially to digital commerce, is really, really key, and to increase cooperation and to really have a cybersecurity environment for consumers especially is very, very important. And AI, in the most challenging part, and that's why I see it as an opportunity, is that these matters are being regulated as we speak everywhere in the world. So this is a great opportunity, and I think it would benefit the whole, business environment.
Mm-hmm. Takemasa-san, anything that we didn't put on the table that Tokyo is or should be watching, or Asia is or should be watching in this negotiation?
Yes, I briefly mentioned it as my first statement, but I'm very focused on the poison pill provision, which goes beyond the USMCA. And actually, if I check the US-Malaysia trade deal, I think we can see the expansion of poison pill provision. So if the similar provision was introduced in the USMCA, I think it has a very strong impact on Asian countries to negotiate trade agreement with, of course, with the United States, but also with Canada or Mexico. And the new provision might be not only limited to the non-market economy, but it might also include other countries that might jeopardize U.S. interests. So in that case, even TPP or other any trade agreement would be included would be the subject of the poison pill provision, and then that makes countries' negotiation for trade deals becomes very difficult. So I'm really focusing on the poison pill, and I hope that provision will be not expanded anymore. Thank you.
Josh, you have the last word.
Yeah, I think one critical issue which we didn't get a chance to get into is dispute settlement. There's robust dispute settlement provisions in USMCA, which obviously the administration has completely ignored. But I think for Canada and Mexico, there's going to be a critical question around, how much certainty are they going to get from the administration once they go through this process again of renegotiating the agreement? And I think for the business community, the value of the agreement ultimately is going to lie in the rules and the willingness of the governments to comply with them. So somehow recommitting to the dispute settlement provisions, but what else do we need, right? What else do Canada and Mexico need in particular to avoid this type of ongoing tariff threat in the future?
Yeah, and I would add, if you look at the trade agreements that have been negotiated in the past 6 months, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but none of them have dispute settlement provisions.
Yeah.
It's basically, the U.S. can decide whether a country is implementing or not and take the measures, that it wants to take.
Yeah.
And so it will be interesting to see how this issue shakes out in the USMCA. So with that, I want to thank our panelists for what I found to be an excellent discussion, and one that we're going to continue because this is just the start. As the USMCA review, really gets going, I think that this Asian angle is going to be extremely important going forward. So thanks again to our panelists and our viewers. Everyone have a great day. And Tamako-san, have a good evening.
Thank you.